Now, lobbying is a standard, tested, old tradition within the American system. And the whole idea of lobbying is that you want your side of the story to be heard. So if Biafra, the people promoting Biafra, if they are going to the US and they are paying how much? $60,000 to sell their own story, that Igbos have been marginalized and persecuted in Nigeria, and that the idea of a Republic of Biafra will be a good proposition. I think it makes sense that the Nigerian government too is in that space. It's not about the money. It's about the fact that the Nigerian government wants to be heard so that there's not just one voice in the room. The other matter is Nigeria being designated a country of particular concern on October 30, 2025 by President Trump. So it's a very good diplomatic move to say we want to have our own people in the room. To say, one, there is no persecution of Christians in Nigeria, or where it exists, the Nigerian government is addressing those issues, and religion is not, a major problem in Nigeria to the extent that this is, a neutral state when it comes to religion, which is well stated in Section 10 of the 1999 Constitution, and which the Minister of Foreign Affairs referred to at a forum, I think, in Germany.
What the federal government could not do, IPOB members or the Igbos invited Donald Trump to come and do it. So why are they not attacking Donald Trump? If what he came to do here was is not in the interest of Nigeria, why should they not own up? In fact, they should be praising themselves that they have done a national duty for Nigeria. IPOB members, when they accuse you of being responsible for Donald Trump, beat your chest and say, yes, we thank God we did it. Yes, that is what they refused to do. They now invited somebody who came to do it. And let me tell you, remember they have proscribed IPOB as a terrorist organization. So if actually they were a terrorist organization, would Donald Trump have listened to them? All this is a shame on the federal government. A group they should recognize for who they are, what they represent. You are not demonizing them, vilifying them, but elsewhere, outside here, they are recognized. So if they accuse you that you are the one that brought Donald Trump, beat your chest and say, yes, we did it. And he came for the good of Nigeria.
I would just say congratulations to Nnamdi Kanu and those fighting for Biafra, because what you're about to hear now will shock you. Please pay attention and watch as I narrate this very story. It is actually a new development, and you shouldn't wait to listen to the end. I keep asking myself, who is advising Bola Ahmed Tinubu? Who is advising the President of Republic of Nigeria? Well, Nigeria, they really make mistake. Nigeria, they really make mistake. They're going to do like this now, and Biafra go come, and people no go even know what they happen. I mean, beyond the headlines, military posturing, and lobbying dollars, the most consequential impact of this unfolding crisis lies in what it unintentionally empowers. Why Nigerian political class is focused on damage control in the Washington. The structural consequences of Trump's intervention are quietly reshaping the balance of legitimacy inside and outside the country. The state versus separatist framing that once defined the Biafran question is giving way to a more dangerous reality for Abuja, one in which the Nigerian state itself is on trial as we speak. In this very emerging context, the Biafran agitation, long dismissed as French, radical, or criminal, finds renewed strategic relevance, and at the center of that very recalibration sits Nnamdi Kanu. We are going to say much today, and you are going to enjoy listening to this to the end, especially if you are a sympathizer to the Biafra cause. Now let's begin. Nigeria's security crisis did not begin yesterday, and it is no longer deniable. For over 15 years, Islamic terror groups like Boko Haram, ISWAP, and heavily armed Fulani militia have unleashed relentless violence across northern Nigeria, and the victims predominantly in the north central and northeast. The victims are overwhelmingly Christian farming communities, church leaders, and the rural populations, whose only crime is their faith and their land. According to documentation by International Society for Civil Liberties and Rule of Law, over 52,000 Christians have been unalived since 2009. The entire villages have been erased, churches burned, priests abducted and murdered. This is not random violence. It is patterned, sustained, and ideologically driven. Yet, despite the staggering death toll, the Nigerian government has spent years doing what it does best, denying reality. And I would unequivocally say this: the worst mistake that Nigerian government have made so far last year, especially during the time of that US designation, is to come out to deny that there was no Christian genocide. And you'll remember that the US had to send a delegate to come and know what is happening. And when they came, they saw more than what that was reported to them. And that is the news. So, under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Abuja has aggressively rejected the term Christian genocide, hiding behind vague explanations such as banditry, communal clash, and resource disputes. And this position is not just misleading, it is morally bankrupt. Why Muslims have also suffered casualties, the scale, targeting, and consistency of attacks against Christians reveal a disturbing truth: the Nigerian state has either lost control or choosing indifference, especially when the victims are Christians and politically expendable. So, Tinubu's presidency only deepened these very suspicions, in my own view. Talking about his controversial Muslim ticket sent a chilling signal to Nigeria's Christian population that power had been consolidated without them and possibly against them. And this internationally sent a very, very red flag on the belief of this very Christian genocide claim. And this is why I keep on asking, why are you denying it when obviously the international communities see what you represent, the imaging of Nigeria? So it was in this climate of fear and abandonment that Biafran self-determination movements found renewed urgency and international relevance. Now, for decades, the Igbo-dominated Southeast, scared by the genocidal 1967 to 1970 Biafran War, has warned that Nigeria is structurally incapable of protecting minorities. Groups such as the indigenous people of Biafra and the Biafran Republic government in exile from Simon Ekpa argued that today's massacres were confirmed an old truth. According to them, they say Nigeria is a failed colonial construct sustained by violence. Why Abuja rushed to label IPOB a terrorist organization, it failed again to apply the same urgency to Fulani militia, roaming freely with military-grade weapons. Now, what happened next? Recognizing that Nigeria's internal justice system offers no protection, Biafran groups escalated the battle internationally. Since at least 2023, the Biafra Republic government in exile has aggressively lobbied Washington, hiring the firm Madison and Washington at roughly $66,000 per month. That was the news. Now, their argument was blunt and unapologetic. What is happening in Nigeria is a religious motivated extermination enabled by a complicit state. They called for US sanction on Nigeria's officials, international recognition of Biafra, and strategic partnership, especially energy cooperation, in a future Biafran state rich in oil and gas. Now, these efforts found fertile ground among US conservative lawmakers like Ted Cruz and the representative Relimo, openly accusing Nigeria of ignoring and in some cases facilitating the slaughter of Christians. And that Abuja dismissed as misinformation was increasingly seen in Washington as willful blindness. Now, the situation reached a breaking point after Donald Trump's return to power. Following his election victory and the January 2025 inauguration, Trump leaned heavily into the issue, driven by both ideology and pressure from evangelical voters. On October 31st, 2025, he redesignated Nigeria as a country of particular concern under the International Religious Freedom Act, a move Abuja had long feared. The very next day, Trump escalated dramatically. We all know and read and saw what happened. Now, in a Truth Social post that stunned diplomats, Trump threatened to cut off all US aid to Nigeria immediately if the unaliving of Christians continued. He went further, instructing the newly renamed Department of War to prepare for military action. His language was unfiltered and unmistakable. the United States was prepared to go in guns a-blazing for a fast, furious, vicious, and sweet, according to Donald Trump, and sweet campaign to eliminate Islamic terrorists operating freely on Nigerian soil. Now, there goes the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, as they backed the position, explicitly citing Fulani militia and jihadist groups. Trump referenced the figures of over 3,100 Christians being unalived in recent attacks. The numbers Abuja could not credibly refute, while some analysts attempted to dilute the religious dimension. The reality remained unchanged. Christian communities were being wiped out, and the Nigerian state had failed catastrophically. Abuja's response was predictably defensive. Tinubu's spokesperson, Daniel Buola, denied any genocide and repeated tired claims about constitutional protections. Privately, however, panic set in. Trump's threats dominated Nigerian media, pushing US-Nigeria relations to their lowest point since the Civil War era. A US congressional delegation led by Ray Moore arrived to investigate a humiliating moment for a country that claims a regional leadership. Now, by early November, Trump openly discussed options ranging from airstrikes to ground operations. Around Christmas 2025, those threats became reality when the US forces struck Islamic State targets, marking America's first direct military action on Nigerian soil in decades. Don't forget, visa restriction followed, targeting Nigerians implicated in religious violence. Now cornered and exposed, Tinubu's government did not reform. It panicked and paid. On December 17th, 2025, through National Security Advisor Nuhu Ribadu, Nigeria signed a staggering contract with DCI Group, a Republican-aligned lobbying powerhouse. The cost was $750,000 per month, up to $9 million annually, to sanitize Nigeria's image and suppress the genocide narrative. Now, the DCI Group's mission was clear: drown out Biafran voices, reassure Trump's inner cycle, and rebrand Nigeria as a protector of Christians. Really? What happened next? Despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary, it was a naked admission that Abuja could not win on facts, only on influence. The result was a full-blown lobbying war, with Nigeria desperately outspending Biafran groups to buy silence and favor in Washington. By January 13th, 2026, African Confidential exposed the arrangement, outbidding Christian secessionists to save itself. Now, social media exploded. Analysts openly questioned why it took foreign threats for Nigerians' lives, especially Christian lives, to suddenly matter. For Biafrans, the episode confirmed everything they had argued for years, that Nigeria only responds to pressure, not justice. The blood of Christians became a bargaining chip in Washington, while Abuja scrambled to protect its international standing rather than its citizens. Now, as of January 21st, 2026, the crisis remains unresolved. There is no full-scale US invasion, but pressure is relentless. Sanction looms, military options remain on the table. Lobbyists continue to whisper in Trump's ear. Now, for those arguing, do you now see that Trump doesn't actually care? Let's continue and finish up this very story. What is undeniable is this: Nigeria has been exposed to the most horrible image ever, both globally and within. Its failure to protect its people, especially Christians, has international consequences. And for Biafra, the world is finally listening. Now, how does this favor Nnamdi Kanu in any way? Beyond the immediate diplomatic fallout, this confrontation fundamentally reshapes the political and legal terrain in favor of Biafran self-determination, and by extension, the case of Nnamdi Kanu, the detained leader of indigenous people of Biafra for years, and the Nigerian government framed Kanu as a criminal agitator divorced from any legitimate grievance. That narrative is now collapsing under international scrutiny. First, Trump's intervention internationalized the core Biafran argument that Nigeria is either unwilling or incapable of protecting a significant segment of its population, particularly Christians in the Middle Belt and the Southeast. Now, once a conflict is framed as a matter of systemic state failure and religious persecution, agitation ceases to be treason and begins to resemble self-preservation. Remember the agenda of Nnamdi Kanu. Remember the things he has been saying about the same issue of Christian genocide. Secessionist movements gain legitimacy not when they shout the loudest, but when the parent state is exposed as dysfunctional and morally compromised. Nigeria has now been exposed by its own allies. Secondly, the US designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern creates a legal and diplomatic contradiction that directly benefit Nnamdi Kanu. Abuja cannot, on one hand, tell the world that religious persecution is exaggerated, and on the other hand, spend millions lobbying Washington to explain its protection of Christians. That contradiction weakens Nigeria's credibility in any international forum where Kanu's detention, extraordinary rendition, and prolonged incarceration without resolution are challenged. It strengthens argument that his prosecution is political, not criminal. Third, we talk about the crisis vindicating Kanu's long-standing warnings. For over a decade, he argued that Nigeria was sliding towards sectarian collapse and that Christians, particularly in non-dominant regions, would be sacrificed to preserve the elite power balances. These warnings were dismissed as extremist propaganda. Today, they are echoed by the US lawmakers, senior American officials, and even military action following up. The irony is unavoidable. The Nigerian state now relies on foreign validation to explain a crisis Kanu predicted long ago. Fourth, you talk about the heightened US pressure, which places direct limit on Abuja's room for repression. As long as Nigeria is under scrutiny for religious violence, it becomes harder to justify the continued detention of a high-profile Christian separatist leader, that is Nnamdi Kanu. So any harsh move against Kanu now risks reinforcing the very narrative Abuja is paying bill. Abuja is paying millions to suppress, that dissenting Christians are silenced while their killers roam freely. In strategic terms, Kanu becomes less of a domestic security issue and more of international human rights liability. Fifth, we talk about the lobbying war itself as an admission of weakness. State confident in their legitimacy do not outsource their moral defense. And I keep asking myself, who is advising Bola Ahmed Tinubu on this? Because he's doing more harm than good. Look, by spending up to $9 million US, this is not naira. Like, that is billions. This one is counting on billions. It should be 10 billions or more than annually to counter Biafran messaging. Nigeria has tactically, acknowledged that the Biafran narrative resonates in Washington, and this shifts leverage. Even if Biafra does not, gain immediate recognition, the movement benefit from sustained visibility, sympathy, and alignment with broader Christian advocates in networks, Christian advocates networks in the West, networks that already view Nnamdi Kanu as a symbol rather than a criminal. Finally, the broader geopolitical message is very, very clear in this very case. Nigeria is no longer the unquestioned gatekeeper of its internal narrative and internal affairs. Once foreign powers begin to define the crisis through sanctions, military strikes, and public threats, internal agitators gain strategic oxygen. History shows that secessionist movements do not succeed because they are militarily superior. No, but they succeed because the parent state loses international confidence, and Nigeria is dangerously close to that very threshold. In this sense, Nnamdi Kanu does not need to be free today to be politically strengthened. His relevance has already been restored. His core claim that Nigeria is structurally hostile to his people and their faith. It's no longer a fringe argument. It is now a matter debated in Washington, enforced through policy and backed by power. So whether Abuja likes it or not, this crisis has shifted the balance, and in that very shift, Biafran agitation has moved from the margins towards the center of international concern. Conclusively, what is unfolding is no longer just a dispute over insecurity or diplomatic language. It is a reckoning Nigeria's refusal to confront the reality of mass unaliving, resort to denial, and its decision to outsource truth. Once a government loses moral authority, it almost loses control over how its future is imagined, both by its citizens and by the world. For the Biafra movement, this very moment represents more than validation. This is about perspectives. Here we give it to you the way the media cannot oblige to. If you found this very breakdown insightful, do not forget to smash the subscribe button. Subscribe to this very channel, because we will keep on bringing to you unfiltered and raw analysis.